A millionaire pays a stranger to carry his child. The woman's shocking secret changes his life forever. In the heart of a bustling city, where wealth and power reigned supreme, there lived a millionaire named Victor Blackwell. With a fortune built on ruthless ambition and a heart hardened by success, Victor moved through life with an air of invincibility. He believed himself to be above the common folk, untouchable by the struggles that plagued their daily lives. One fateful morning, as Victor strode through the crowded streets, his gaze fell upon a woman struggling to carry a heavy load. Her face was etched with lines of hardship, her eyes weary from the weight of the world. In a moment of condescension, Victor approached her, a smirk playing on his lips. "You there," he called out, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I have a proposition for you." The woman, named Amara, looked up at him, her expression guarded. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone flat. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "I need someone to carry my child for a short distance," he said, gesturing to the sleeping infant strapped to his chest. "I'll pay you generously for your trouble." Amara's eyes widened at the sight of the money, a flicker of desperation crossing her face. She hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Victor handed over his child, he failed to notice the glint of recognition in Amara's eyes, a secret buried deep within her soul. For little did he know, their paths had crossed before, in a way that would forever change the course of their lives. Years ago, in a time almost forgotten, Victor Blackwell's rise to power had been paved with the broken dreams of others. Among those left in his wake was a young woman named Lily, Amara's beloved sister. Lily had been a bright and ambitious soul, her heart set on building a better life for herself and her family. She had secured a job at Victor's company, her talent and dedication quickly catching the millionaire's eye. But as Lily climbed the corporate ladder, she unwittingly became entangled in Victor's web of deceit. Blinded by his charm and promises of success, Lily had fallen for Victor's lies. She had trusted him, confided in him, and ultimately paid the price for her naivety. When the truth of Victor's treachery came to light, Lily was left shattered, her dreams crumbling to dust. Amara had watched helplessly as her sister spiraled into despair, the light in her eyes extinguished by the cruel hand of betrayal. In the years that followed, Amara had carried the burden of her sister's pain, vowing to one day make Victor Blackwell pay for his sins. Now, as she cradled the millionaire's child in her arms, Amara felt the weight of her secret pressing upon her heart. She knew that the time for reckoning was drawing near, and she would stop at nothing to see justice served. As Amara carried the child through the city streets, her mind raced with the memories of her sister's downfall. She recalled the nights spent holding Lily as she wept, the anger that had consumed her own heart as she watched Victor Blackwell continue to thrive. But Amara was no longer the helpless bystander she had once been. In the years since her sister's tragedy, she had grown stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to right the wrongs of the past. She had studied the ways of the wealthy and powerful, learning their secrets and weaknesses, biding her time until the moment was right to strike. And now, with Victor's child in her arms, Amara knew that the opportunity she had been waiting for had finally arrived. She would use this chance to get close to the millionaire, to gain his trust and confidence, all the while gathering the evidence she needed to bring him to his knees. As she walked, Amara's eyes fell upon a small community garden nestled between two towering buildings. The sight of the lush greenery and colorful blooms brought a flicker of hope to her heart. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, life could still find a way to thrive. With renewed determination, Amara pressed on, her steps growing stronger with each passing moment. She knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. For the sake of her sister, for the sake of justice, she would not rest until Victor Blackwell was made to pay for his crimes. Victor Blackwell sat in his opulent office, his eyes fixed on the city skyline stretching out before him. He had built an empire on the backs of others, his wealth and power growing with each passing year. But despite his success, Victor could not shake the feeling that something was missing from his life. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to manipulate them to his own ends. But as he thought back to his encounter with Amara, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of unease. There had been something in her eyes, a depth of knowledge and understanding that he had never seen before. As he mulled over these thoughts, a knock at the door jolted him back to the present. "Come in," he called out, his voice tinged with irritation. To his surprise, it was Amara who entered, her head held high and her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her tone cool and measured. "I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." Victor leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "And what business might that be?" Amara stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "The business of my sister," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The business of the lies you told and the lives you destroyed." At the mention of her sister, Victor's face paled, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice wavering slightly. But Amara would not be deterred. "Oh, I think you do, Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And I'm here to make sure that you never forget the price of your actions." In the days that followed, Amara began to weave herself into the fabric of Victor Blackwell's life. She started working at his company, her keen intellect and tireless work ethic quickly earning her a reputation as a rising star. But even as she climbed the corporate ladder, Amara never lost sight of her true purpose. She watched Victor closely, studying his every move and gathering the evidence she needed to bring him down. She attended meetings with him, worked late nights by his side, all the while biding her time and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As she spent more time with Victor, Amara began to see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Behind the mask of power and confidence, there was a man haunted by his own demons, a man who had sacrificed everything for the sake of his own ambition. And yet, even as she grew to understand him better, Amara could not forget the pain he had caused her family. She could not forgive the years of suffering her sister had endured, the dreams that had been shattered by his selfish actions. But Amara was not alone in her quest for justice. As she navigated the treacherous waters of Victor's world, she found unexpected allies in the form of her co-workers and fellow community members. They too had been wronged by the millionaire's greed, their lives upended by his callous disregard for others. Together, they began to build a movement, a quiet rebellion against the forces of corruption and injustice. They met in secret, sharing their stories and their hopes for a better future, drawing strength from each other's courage and resilience. And as Amara watched this community grow and thrive, she knew that she was not alone in her fight. She knew that together, they could bring about the change they so desperately needed, and that justice would finally be served. As the weeks turned into months, Victor Blackwell began to take notice of Amara's growing influence within his company. He watched as she navigated the corporate world with ease, her intelligence and charisma winning over even the most skeptical of his colleagues. At first, he had dismissed her as just another employee, a cog in the machine of his empire. But as he spent more time with her, he began to see the fire that burned within her, the unbreakable spirit that refused to be tamed. Despite himself, Victor found himself drawn to Amara, his curiosity piqued by the mystery that surrounded her. He began to seek her out, engaging her in conversations that stretched late into the night, probing the depths of her mind and searching for the secrets that lay hidden there. But even as he grew closer to her, Victor could not shake the feeling that Amara was holding something back, that there was a part of her that he could never truly know. He saw it in the way her eyes would sometimes grow distant, the way her smile would falter when she thought no one was watching. And then, one day, the truth finally came to light. In a moment of weakness, Victor let his guard down, revealing a piece of his past that he had long kept hidden. He spoke of a young woman he had once known, a woman whose life he had destroyed in his quest for power and success. As he spoke, Amara's face grew pale, her eyes widening with shock and recognition. And in that moment, Victor realized the terrible truth. The woman he spoke of was none other than Amara's sister, the woman whose life he had shattered all those years ago. The revelation of Victor's connection to Amara's sisters sent shockwaves through the company, rippling outward like a stone thrown into a still pond. Whispers began to circulate, rumors of the millionaire's dark past and the secrets he had long kept hidden. But even as the truth began to emerge, Victor refused to back down. He clung to his power and his privilege, convinced that he could weather any storm that came his way. He lashed out at those who dared to question him, his once charming demeanor giving way to a cold and calculating fury. Amara, however, remained undaunted. Armed with the knowledge of Victor's crimes, she redoubled her efforts to bring him to justice. She reached out to her allies within the company and the community, rallying them to her cause and urging them to stand strong in the face of adversity. Together, they began to build a case against Victor, gathering evidence of his misdeeds and exposing the rot that lay at the heart of his empire. They worked tirelessly, often late into the night, driven by a shared sense of purpose and a hunger for justice. But even as they made progress, they knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Victor was a powerful man, with deep pockets and influential friends. He would not go down without a fight, and Amara knew that she would need all the strength and courage she could muster to see this battle through to the end. As she looked around at the faces of her fellow community members, Amara felt a surge of pride and determination. They had come so far, had fought so hard for what they believed in. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew that they would face them together, united in their quest for a better world. As the pressure on Victor Blackwell mounted, the millionaire began to unravel. His once unshakable confidence gave way to paranoia and fear, his every move shadowed by the specter of his past misdeeds. He lashed out at those around him, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He fired loyal employees on a whim, his once keen business acumen clouded by his growing desperation. And all the while, the evidence against him continued to mount, a damning indictment of his crimes and his callous disregard for the lives of others. But even as Victor's world began to crumble around him, Amara refused to give in to despair. She knew that the road to justice was long and winding, that there would be setbacks and obstacles along the way. But she also knew that she had the strength and the courage to see this fight through to the end, no matter what the cost. She drew inspiration from the small acts of kindness and compassion that she witnessed every day, the quiet moments of grace that reminded her of the goodness that still existed in the world. She saw it in the way her coworkers would rally around a struggling colleague, offering support and encouragement when it was needed most. She saw it in the way her community would come together to help those in need, whether it was through a food drive or a fundraiser for a local charity. And as she watched these small seeds of hope take root and grow, Amara knew that they had the power to change the world. She knew that every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the potential to ripple outward, touching lives and transforming hearts in ways that could never be measured. With this knowledge burning bright within her, Amara pressed on, her determination unwavering in the face of even the darkest of days. For she knew that the fight for justice was not hers alone, but belonged to all those who had been wronged, all those who had suffered at the hands of the powerful and the greedy. And she would not rest until that fight was won. As the case against Victor Blackwell gained momentum, Amara found herself at the center of a media firestorm. Reporters camped outside her home, hounding her for interviews and statements, eager to get a glimpse of the woman who had dared to take on one of the most powerful men in the city. At first, Amara was overwhelmed by the attention, her every move scrutinized and dissected by the hungry eyes of the press. But as she began to speak out, to share her story and the stories of those who had been wronged by Victor's greed, she found her voice growing stronger with each passing day. She spoke of the toll that Victor's actions had taken on her family, the years of pain and suffering that her sister had endured. She spoke of the countless others who had been crushed beneath the weight of his ambition, their dreams and hopes left in tatters. And as she spoke, something remarkable began to happen. People started coming forward, sharing their own stories of injustice and abuse at the hands of the wealthy and the powerful. They gathered in the streets, in the halls of government, their voices rising in a chorus of anger and defiance. Amara watched in awe as this movement took shape, as the seeds of change that she had planted began to take root and flourish. She saw the power of unity, the strength that came from standing together in the face of adversity. And as the pressure on Victor Blackwell grew, as the evidence of his crimes mounted and the public outcry reached a fever pitch, Amara knew that the time for justice had finally come. In the face of the growing public outcry, Victor Blackwell made a last-ditch effort to save himself. He called in every favor he was owed, every connection he had ever made, in a desperate attempt to bury the evidence against him and silence his accusers. But even as he scrambled to cover his tracks, Victor knew that he was fighting a losing battle. The truth of his crimes had been laid bare for all to see, and no amount of money or influence could erase the stain of his misdeeds. As the net closed in around him, Victor grew increasingly erratic, his behavior becoming more and more unpredictable. He lashed out at those closest to him, alienating even his most loyal supporters. And all the while, the specter of his past continued to haunt him, the ghosts of those he had wronged whispering in his ear. Amara watched all of this unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that the day of reckoning was finally at hand. She had fought long and hard for this moment, had sacrificed so much to see justice served. And now, as the walls of Victor's empire began to crumble, she knew that her efforts had not been in vain. But even as she savored this moment of triumph, Amara knew that the fight was far from over. She knew that there would be others like Victor, other powerful men and women who believed themselves above the law, above the consequences of their actions. And so as the case against Victor Blackwell reached its climax, Amara found herself standing before a packed courtroom, her heart racing as she prepared to take the stand. She knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to finally speak the truth and see justice served. As she took her place before the judge, Amara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She thought of her sister, of the pain and suffering she had endured at Victor's hands. She thought of all the others who had been wronged, all the lives that had been shattered by his greed and callousness. And then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. She told her story, of the way Victor had charmed and manipulated her sister, of the lies he had told and the dreams he had destroyed. She spoke of the years of anguish and despair, of the toll that his actions had taken on her family and so many others. As she spoke, Amara could feel the eyes of the courtroom upon her, could sense the weight of their judgment and their sympathy. And when at last she finished, a hush fell over the room, a moment of silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, a single voice rang out. "We believe you," it said, and then another, until the entire courtroom was filled with the sound of voices raised in support and solidarity. In that moment, Amara felt a surge of emotion unlike anything she had ever known. She saw the faces of her community, the people who had stood by her through thick and thin, who had believed in her even when she had doubted herself. And she knew that, no matter what happened next, she would never forget this moment, this feeling of unity and strength. In the end, the verdict was swift and decisive. Victor Blackwell was found guilty on all counts, his crimes laid bare for all to see. He was sentenced to a long prison term, his once vast fortune seized and redistributed to those he had wronged. But even as the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause, Amara knew that the true victory lay not in the punishment of one man, but in the transformation of a community. She saw it in the way her neighbors came together, in the way they supported one another through the long and difficult process of healing and renewal. She saw it in the way the city began to change, in the way that the old power structures began to crumble and fall away. She saw it in the way that new leaders emerged, people who had once been marginalized and overlooked, but who now stood tall and proud, ready to build a better world for all. And as Amara watched all of this unfold, she knew that the seeds of change had been planted long ago, in the small acts of kindness and compassion that had sustained her and so many others through the darkest of times. She knew that it was these seeds, these tiny moments of grace, that had the power to transform the world, one heart at a time. In the years that followed, Amara became a leader in her community, a voice for justice and equality that inspired people far beyond the borders of her city. She worked tirelessly to build a better world, to create a society where everyone had the chance to thrive and succeed, no matter their background or circumstances. She founded organizations and charities, fought for laws and policies that would protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. She spoke out against injustice wherever she saw it, her voice a clarion call for change that echoed across the nation. And through it all, she never forgot the lessons she had learned, the truths that had been seared into her soul by the fires of adversity. She knew that the fight for justice was never truly over, that there would always be those who sought to exploit and oppress, to bend the world to their will. But she also knew that there would always be those who stood up to them, who fought back against the darkness with the light of their courage and conviction. She knew that, as long as there were people willing to stand together, to support one another through the storms of life, there was still hope for a better tomorrow. And so, as Amara looked back on her life, on the long and winding road that had brought her to this moment, she felt a sense of peace and purpose that she had never known before. She knew that she had made a difference, that she had touched countless lives and left the world a little bit better than she had found it. She thought of her sister, of the memory that had sustained her through the darkest of times. She thought of the community that had stood by her, of the bonds of love and friendship that had held them together through thick and thin. And she knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what obstacles they might face, they would face them together, united in their vision of a world where justice and compassion reigned supreme. For Amara had learned the power of hope, the strength that came from believing in something greater than oneself. She had learned that, even in the face of the greatest darkness, there was always a light that could guide the way, a spark of goodness that could never be extinguished. And with that knowledge burning bright within her, Amara stepped forward into the future, ready to face whatever lay ahead with courage and resolve, knowing that she was not alone, that she was part of something greater, something that would endure long after she was gone. For in the end, it was not the power of wealth or status that truly mattered, but the power of the human spirit, the power of compassion and unity, the power of love. And that was a power that could never be defeated, a power that would always triumph, no matter the odds.